So welcome to the Mission 11 T2X Commentary. This is for the Grand Hotel. And here we're looking at our second cutscene that we have here. Just wanted to make a quick note about the space that you see. This space was completely invented by the cutscene guys, Darkcraft Studios. And we see a part of Malik's garden here with some fencing and the iron gates and Zaya and Malik coming through. And this was originally not anywhere in the game. But after we got this cutscene back and we saw it, we wanted to put it in the game somewhere so that the player could explore it as a real space. And so Duncan, when he was designing Map 1, went back after he got the map from Mad God, went back and looked at this cutscene, and we got some textures from the Darkcraft guys, and I made a couple low poly versions of some of those objects, like the fountainhead and the fencing and so forth. And he actually put this space back into Mission 1. So in the very first map, when you're playing the game, you might recognize this space, and it might be more recognizable after you play if you played through more than once. But certainly there, I think it's a good connection. It's again good for internal consistency.
Well, this is this part of the cutscene that we're seeing here. This is one of the first things that the guys turned in. And
ironically, it's one of the things that we didn't script, that we didn't write. We had basically a script that called for Zaya and Malik to look into the pool and for Malik to show Zaya some images, but those guys really wanted to go nuts with this scene and do this kind of a really visceral, violent depiction of what happens to Mechanist servants.
Well, because we didn't get to see it in in Thief 2, we had some idea, but we weren't exactly clear exactly what happened to him. And again, this is, there's two things I would say about this. First of all, again, like I mentioned earlier, trying not to pull any punches, trying to just, not be gratuitous, but to really not shy away from, some of the really terrible things that were going on here, because it again gives Zaya that much more motivation to do the things that she's doing, which are really out of character for her. So she needed to be confronted with, just the
real
savagery, really, of the whole thing. So I would say that, and then the other thing, just as a, to give some props to the cutscene team that put these together. This was one of the first things that came back, and I remember after watching this, it really, for me, personally, it kind of made me realize that we were shooting pretty high here, for as far as the project, because when you see a cutscene that's just the quality of, especially that section right there with the servant thing, you realize that the quality of the project is it's pretty high. There's going to be some high demands here, right? And because you don't want to turn around after that and have a crappy dialogue and lazy
mission design.
Everything's
got to be coherent and fit together.
Well, so in a way, I mean, we had pretty high standards, I think, to begin with. But for me, and I can't speak for anybody else, but for me, when I saw this, it really I realized I had to step up my game, especially with the writing. And just the overall, the way the plot was working and all that we really needed to bring the goods, and I hope we did that in a way that did kind of come up to the same standard as some of the graphic design, the videos here that we're watching.
And you got to remember too that the cutscene team is basically three guys. Darkcraft Studios is three guys that were all active in the Thief community, and after this project was over, they went off to form their own company, which was fantastic. But this whole time that they were working on the project for us, there were just three of them. This wasn't a whole team of guys. Right. They needed to build all the 3D assets. They needed to texture them all. They needed to light the scenes and do all the rendering. It was just a huge process. Mm-hmm. And from the very beginning, they were always very gung-ho about it, very confident that they could do the scripts that we had written. But it was really tough because I always kind of felt like we had not nearly enough communication with them. That was one of the only departments that where the leads, I think, in the mission designers didn't communicate quite enough as would have been ideal under other circumstances.
Made us kind of nervous for a while.
It did for a long time.
What are those guys doing over there? You know, what are they going to turn in? What's it going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, and those guys, the Darkcraft guys, Saturnine, Joss, and Caffeinated Zombie all knew each other in real life. They're all from Britain and lived close by, so they were all able to work in close proximity to one another. And that, I'm sure, made a huge difference. But for the rest of us, we were kind of waiting on the edge of our seats when they were kind of went off for months at a time and worked without showing us anything. And then we'd get like a little render or a screenshot or something from the cutscenes that they were working on. And near the end of the project, when we really started getting big chunks of them back, we were really blown away by everything that they were doing. They were really everything that we'd hoped for.
Exactly. Yeah, and
it was a long process.
It was a long process, and it was just again, you had to just trust that people were going to do what they said they were going to do, and come through for you. One other thing I'd say about the cutscene, there was a lot of I guess uncertainty about where the cutscene was going to play, because in the Thief, we've already done, we've all played the Dark Project, we've played the Metal Age, and they're pretty much the same in that, we mentioned earlier the 3 acts to the story and kind of the way the story arc would go, and there would be a climax at the end of each act,
and usually a cutscene there.
Yeah, followed by a cutscene, and the cutscene would propel the story forward, and it was difficult to do that here just because of the momentum of it and the way the story was being told. It just, the arcs kind of worked the same as the original games, but we didn't feel like what was going on in the story at the time, as Dave has mentioned some of the previous missions here, we didn't want to render some of these things in cutscenes. For instance, the combat or the confrontation between the smugglers and the Hammerites, we wanted that to be in game. So whereas that typically would have been a cutscene, it wasn't, and that moved the cutscene. The cutscene just kept getting pushed further and further back into the game, and we ended up here at the end with 2 cutscenes that are relatively close together. Which ultimately, when you play through the game, I don't think it's that noticeable. But the big concern about it was, first of all, that again, it wasn't like the original games, but even more so that Malik had been off screen for so long at that point, and we had not really interacted with him or seen Zaya interact with him, and we tried to, as I mentioned before, kind of keep him in the player's mind through some notes and voice prompts and mentions in the briefings and things like that. But we were just concerned that he was out of it for too long. But there really wasn't anything we could do about it because we wanted to stick with the story that we had. And
and we wanted to place the cutscenes in the best possible locations.
Right.
When we were starting out, we knew that we wanted to do briefings in front of almost every map, and we knew that we could realistically do 3 to 4 cutscenes, which, when I think back on it, was probably insane. Yeah, because that's the same amount of work as a full game, and we were just a bunch of mod guys that were screwing around. So, but it ended up working out. The cutscene guys that at Darkcraft did just a phenomenal job with these, but we felt these were the best places to insert the cutscenes and to kind of have this off-screen, or I should say, out-of-mission storytelling.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that that Strange Blue, it was something she was involved with before she left, was we were trying to decide with what we wanted to portray in the cutscenes, and we really wanted to keep the most emotional or the most pivotal moments in the cutscenes, and of course that would be obviously the one at the beginning where Zaya is trying to decide, is she going to stay and seek revenge, or go running home with her tail tucked, which she can't do anyway because she doesn't have a boat. But it was a decision making moment for her, and we felt like that was an emotional moment that needed to have a cutscene. And then when she really does fully understand what's happened to Kadar, as she did in the last scene there, we felt like that was again needed to have some emotional impact, and there was not obviously any way to really do that in game, and you didn't want to just cover it in a briefing with a picture. I mean, we really wanted to see what was happening to him, and for the player to identify with the horror that she felt as she was watching this, because again, we already knew what happened to the servants. She really didn't understand what that meant, and we wanted that to have a real strong impact. So again, that part was chosen for a cut scene, even though the guys went further with it than we had originally imagined. I'm really glad we chose that to be rendered in a cut scene. Just the other spots. I mean, it's just kind of some of the turning moments in the game. We felt like needed to be done that way, and I think it was a good decision. I mean, I'm still happy with where they were, but that was something that was established fairly early, in the plot development. So
yeah, and the scripts for the cutscenes went through a few revisions. Basically, as the art resources were being done, the audio was done simultaneously, and actually the Darkcraft guys also did the final mixes on, I should say, version 1.0 of the audio. They put in all the dialogue, which was recorded independently, and all the sound effects and so forth, and then from the pacing of that audio file would determine how to space the animation and the rendering of the cutscenes themselves. But just prior to that final mixing of the audio, we did like a few final passes over the cutscene scripts, and we're able to trim a few things here and there and scale back. And the cutscenes are really still pretty long and elaborate, but I think they probably would have been maybe 20 or 30 seconds longer each time without the cuts that we made there at the end. I mean, we were really pretty sparse with the cuts. We really tried to keep as much as our original vision would allow. And usually in a project, you make a lot more cuts than the ones that we had to make for here, and the project's always better because of it. But we got by just fine, I think.
Now, do we have the combustion arrow at this point?
Yeah, we do.
This is her the shard.
This is shifting over to mission design here. This is the final power up that we really introduce, with just a couple missions left in the game, and that's the last pagan crystal, which changes your gas arrows, which are your most powerful weapon, to combustion arrows. And the combustion arrow, the idea behind it was we wanted a kind of super powerful weapon that would kill almost anything in its path, but we wanted to make it, we wanted the player to have to use some kind of strategy in order to make it effective. And so what we thought was that, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, torches, which are normally your foe in the map, suddenly become your friend, and now you have to use like an open flame source in order to ignite these arrows. And that means, strategically speaking, you can't just use the combustion arrow anywhere. You have to find an environmental resource to pair with it, and that makes it a much more emergent gameplay tool.
Right. Especially in the mission that after this one.
Yeah.
Cure.
The next Undead map, yeah, especially.
Right. There's also, since you're on the subject of weapons and stuff, we might want to talk a little bit about the bandoleras, the pistols that some of these guys had.
Oh yeah, we these were some of the guards that we got. The hotel guards, contrary to the brothel guards, who were just these big thugs with big heavy weapons. These guys were equally tough, but very elite, and we wanted to give them a unique look and some unique weaponry, and we ended up going with, instead of having crossbows or bows or whatever, we gave them muskets, which we felt would fit in okay because they were single shot. They'll shoot the player once, and then drop it and then run, and then but they'll do a lot of damage. And then the other guys that we have, instead of sword guys, we gave them these big, heavy kind of iron bludgeons that are like pointed at the end. I don't remember whose idea that was originally. I think it was concepted at some point, and we liked it, so we ended up putting it on the guys in the maps. Right.
Kind of a surprise, I remember the first time there were some things that the design guys wouldn't tell the rest of us, as we were there. Hey, we uploaded a new version of this. Go test. I'll never forget like the shock the first time I'm up on the roof of the hotel walking around where I'd been a million times, and this guy just puts a bullet in me. It was like, what in the world? Where did this come from? I mean, I didn't even know we were going to have these, and so there were some nice little surprises, even for those of us that were doing the testing, things that we didn't know about, and that was kind of cool moment.
Yeah, and again, we didn't have access to the full SDK, so we couldn't program all new AI, but we could certainly have new scripts and a lot of interesting new behavior, so it was always really a challenge whenever we wanted to have a new AI type in the game to see how we could, kind of crowbar that in and get them working consistently. Right. But it seemed to work,
Right. I was going to also mention the guy that designed this. This was, to me, one of the most bizarre things that happened in the whole course of the of the development of T2X was Twin Dreamer was the guy that started out with this, and he had done I guess one or two fan missions.
Yeah, he was one of the guys that I really wanted to get. We talked a little bit in the Mission 6 commentary about the kind of qualities that we look for. Right. I think in mission designers, we wanted guys who are really competent builders, who are not necessarily ambitious, but who were able to build very cleanly and had a lot of good architectural drawing skills and scripting skills. And Twin Dreamer was this guy from the community who made this map called Skull of Herzaloid.
Right.
And the map was essentially kind of a two-part map. It started out in a Baffert-style mansion, and then it had like a little undead section at the bottom, which was very reminiscent of Bone Horde. And again, much like Robin G, I mean, the architecture was very clean. It was just very well built. And it felt very thiefy. It felt like a map that could have easily been in one of the original campaigns in one of the Thief games. And so when we brought him on board, he was excited to work with us. He was, I think he was somewhere in Russia at the time.
Yeah, he's in Russia,
and like Mad God, I guess.
But the thing was, it was really kind of startling because we had just really finished kind of the rough outline of what the missions were going to be, and had some guys assigned to it. And I mean, he turned this thing around. It was this huge hotel. Mm-hmm. I mean, other than some of, it was retextured a little bit, and there's some, we added furniture and some things.
Yeah, we actually did a lot of work on it later, but the
layout of it.
The layout, yeah, he cranked out the layout to this map in like 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it just like appeared, on the FTP, and we're all looking at it going, and I remember Avalon was one of the first ones to play it, and he came back into IRC and he said, it's really good when you're doing this huge campaign, and the first mission you go in and play feels just like something out of the original games. And of course, one of the things that was happening here is we're getting close. We're fully into the Metal Age now, and coming up on some of the events that occurred in the middle of T2.
So you're starting to timeline.
See, you're seeing the Victorian influence coming in here, and this is a little more like something you would have seen in T2. It reminds me a lot of the bank mission, which was intentional. But it was just amazing that he turned around and cranked out this huge map in just a matter of 3 weeks. I mean, really almost everything except the basement, I think, was finished. I don't know if he finished the basement.
Yeah, I mean, well, it wasn't finished per se, but he had a lot of basically the whole layout there. I mean, some of the rooms were just boxes and cubes and so forth, but you could walk from one end of the hotel to another, and it was all there.
It was there.
And, he had at least rough lighting in. And it was only really a matter of weeks later. It was like within the first couple of months that they had even rough guard patrols, and they weren't the final guard patrols that we shipped with, but they are enough to give us an idea of really what gameplay was going to be like in the space, and allow us to play it and see what it felt like, and make feedback and take notes.
Right. Well, and for me as a coordinator and a plot guy, I was just really happy about that, because I thought, well, great, everybody's going to turn their missions in a couple of weeks here. We're well on our way, and of course, 3 years later. But this is what I was saying was so bizarre about it, is he uploads this thing. We play through it. We're really happy about it and all that, and off to a good start. And then he just disappears off the face of the earth.
That happened more than once.
Never heard from him again. And a lot of the other guys, we've talked about guys that started on a mission, but then somebody else took it over. We would get an email or some communication from them that, hey, real life has become too busy
or too busy,
right? And I can't do it. Can somebody else take it over? There would be that communication, or guys would slowly fade out. But Twin Dreamer just disappeared from the community, disappeared from the project, and for his mission, for all intents and purposes, was pretty much finished. I mean, like Rain was saying, there were things that did need to be done, but it was just wild how he was the first one to turn in this huge map that was, saved a lot of work for somebody else in the that would have had to do it. He was almost finished, and then he just disappeared, and we never heard from him again. I mean, he's never been back to the community.
Yeah,
don't know if he ever played.
Adopted a different name or something.
We don't know if he's ever even seen the finished project. I've wondered often where he went to and what happened.
Yeah, but we were really glad to get him, and we were really happy that he worked so fast, because it was a huge asset to us. And we always saw this as kind of one of our model maps. Like, and model map is a term that used to kind of describe a map that sort of exemplifies what you want to create in the rest of the game. Typically when you're trying to finish a project, you make a model map to just test out different systems. And for a long time, that's really what we did with this map. Whenever we got new inventory items in game, or whenever we wanted to try out a new scripting system or whatever, we tried it out in this map, because this was the one that we felt was most similar to the original Thief 2 missions at the very start, near the beginning of the project. So an example of that would be like the map system that we tried. We talked about that a little bit earlier, where we wanted our metagame map, our two-dimensional map, to look like a piece of parchment that was very rough, and then as you explored the map, to have different rooms reveal themselves. And this was a very big, very complicated
very
map.
Tough map.
Yeah,
to
very
make.
tough map. But we felt we could start with this, and if we could prove out the concept in this map, then it would work for all of our other maps.
Right.
And so Fett and I, when we made the maps, we did it for this one first,
Right.
and it turned out to work out really well.
Yeah, did not enjoy that, though.
Yeah, did not enjoy
that. It was not an enjoyable
Yeah.
process.
And same with our weapons in our inventory, because at this point in the game, the player has a full inventory. So, whenever stuff came online, like combustion arrows or confusion arrows, we tried them out in this setting, and then would later apply them to different maps.
And so, to me, and I know we've seen some of these textures elsewhere, but when we started seeing these, these doors put together with that wood, hardwood floor texture and some of the rugs and stuff, it really, this mission really looked a lot like Thief 2. And again, it was, kind of one of those moments where you realize the standard, the thing that what we're shooting for. Is pretty high, and this is how it's going to look, and this is how it's going to play. I mean, this was one of those missions that I think, again, just raised the bar.
Yeah, you could feel the potential right away.
Right.
Even in its rough state. But coming through here, all these textures. I guess you were talking about textures. Most of the textures in here you see are custom. Most of them were done by a Dink again, and he did them fairly early. And he did a couple different sets. We had like some wood textures that we did, some wallpaper textures, some custom Grand Hotel stuff. We wanted to share resources between maps so as to save time and scheduling as much as possible. So we had him make some general marble that we wanted to use in the museum as well. But really, a lot of those textures just ended up in here, and we ended up using different stuff in the museum. But it all worked out extremely well. I think the color palettes in here are very coherent. The look is really pretty good, and the geometry is fairly simple in a lot of cases, because you're dealing with largely flat ceilings and hallways and so forth. But still, the textures and the lighting and so forth carry the look. And it does feel very much like Thief 2. It does feel very Victorian and maybe a little Edwardian in places.
The thing about this map too is just it's just massive. I mean, it's on the same scale as like the bank mission from T2, if not bigger than that. I haven't looked at compared them in Andromeda or anything, but that was the scope of it. Just that it is this huge hotel. It was actually an idea that I had back when I was under the illusion that I was going to create a fan mission and master Dromed. I had this idea to do a hotel, because I thought, well, that's a location we've never been in.
Yeah, you don't master Dromed
masters you, right? I still have nightmares about coplanar errors and things of that nature. But, it was just an idea that I had. Wouldn't it be great, as a thief, to go in and plunder this really posh hotel, just because the hotel would have expensive stuff sitting around, but obviously anybody that can afford to stay in a place like this is going to have some things worth stealing in the rooms. And I started messing around with some design and idea for that as a fan mission, and ultimately, after pulling out my hair and drinking a lot, decided that I wasn't going to master Dromed. And if you've ever messed with Dromed at all, it's a very high learning curve, and I'm just not very technically oriented, but I like the creative idea. So when we started coming up with, we did the story first, and then, as we mentioned before, built missions around the story rather than the other way around. But we did need a big location. It's not a key hunt, but it's a person hunt. We're trying to find Kadar. Where is he? What kind of location could we use that would allow for a lot of gameplay, a lot of exploration, and you really would almost have to do a room-to-room search to look for this person. And of course, a hotel is perfect for that, the Grand Hotel, and it's also a symbol of kind of where the city is going. In the Dark Project, the city is kind of it's portrayed as a rundown, just a typical Dark Ages medieval city. But then in Thief 2, with the rise of the Mechanists and all that, you're seeing, as we mentioned, the Victorian architecture and new machines and cleaner areas and stuff like that. So the Grand Hotel is kind of envisioned as a representation of not what the city had been, but where it was going to, as it was growing and, maybe cleaning up a little bit, but, definitely some of this more modern architecture and things of that, and decorations and things like that. And it was just a good opportunity for a huge map to run around and play in.
And pacing-wise, that's really what we wanted at this point, because we knew that our last 2 maps were not going to be quite as long, and so we wanted this to be, our big human guard missions, so to speak.
All right.
So one of the problems that we had, though, after Twin Dreamer left, was that even though we considered this kind of a great model map, was that this map didn't have a champion. So as we were developing our other maps, the standards raised, as we talked about earlier, standards for scripting and gameplay and also for art, the bar was just raised in all of our other maps, and this map didn't have a champion, so it started to suffer a little bit. And eventually it was a while before we got back and got a chance to really work on it and polish it again. And although the layout was all there and the rough gameplay was there, and it looked like it was mostly there, it actually required, probably about 50% of the effort over again in order to get it up to par.
Well, it was a great space to be in, but it was boring to play because nothing was happening.
It didn't have
in the
anything
space,
there. I mean, you could look at it and say, "Hey, it's 90% done," but guess what? You're going to spend about 60% of your effort on that last 10% polish.
Yeah, exactly.
So actually, what happened was Avalon took over the map for a little while, and he did. Just kind of an interesting spatial pass over it. Like, he added a few little exploratory areas here and there, like a few ledges and balconies that made a big difference. He made some door frame objects and some arches and some archways that he put in a few different key spots. And although he didn't make tons of objects for it, like the objects that he did make made a really huge difference. Like all the little door frames and all the little archways you see everywhere, like really add tremendously to the overall look.
Yeah, it just makes it unique because you've not seen it yet so far. And that was something too that we were kind of challenging ourselves to do is, in each mission, can we add something, not just for the sake of adding something new, but something that really contributes to the environment or the plot or the gameplay, just something that we haven't seen yet, so that it's not just the same old thing, over and over for 13 missions, but the player kind of starts to expect something new and something unique in each level.
Yeah, and I think just technically, I should point out, like, about the time that we were developing this was professionally when Unreal Warfare came out, and static meshes were really big, and people were instead of using custom editors that were BSP based, were starting to use prefab actors from 3D Studio Max and other 3D packages to decorate the levels. So instead of having archways that were built out of brushes, you'd have them that were built out of built-in 3D packages and were hence a lot more ornate and detailed and so forth. And the arches that Avalon built in this map were kind of reminiscent of that, but we didn't use them all over the game for a couple reasons, and they were just purely technological reasons. The objects in this game, the actors that are not brushes in this game, like all the objects in the world, go through a different rendering pipeline, and they're not shaded the same way, so you can kind of tell they're a little bit different. The highest detail on shading is really applied to the brushes in the game, to the brush surfaces, and you can kind of tell if you look at the light maps, what's brush and what's not. And the other reason is, again, physics limitations, because really we could only specify whether or not any one given actor in the world was had like an oriented bounding box or was a sphere. Basically, we didn't have the ability to make complex physics objects like we did in later, more advanced physics engines. But in very limited circumstances, like those few key actors made a big difference, and in this particular map, those arches and those doorways made a really big difference in terms of the aesthetic, and you couldn't really tell that they were limited in terms of their rendering or their physics.
This is a constant problem, with Dark Engine 2. Is you've got this huge ball. It's kind of like the party. At the end of life of the party, they're having this big party, this big cultural event. And everybody that's important is going to be there. And you get in the room, and there's 5 people in there. So we've got this huge dance floor, dance hall thing, and you would love to just fill it up with hundreds of people in there and just make it really busy. But of course, the engine will only accommodate so much movement on screen and so many AI in the same space right there.
Yeah, and, like most games, AI is very expensive. They're some of the most expensive actors in the scene. And also really for gameplay and Thief, you don't want like 20 guys all running around screaming, getting different guards, Yeah.
It is fun to jump in the middle of that group there and kind of watch them all scatter.
Yeah.
You just have to reload usually once you've done that. But all this, like I say, all this space was here with Twin Dreamer, and we kind of had an idea. It was just wild because you couldn't really email him and say, hey, what was this room intended to be? I mean, he just wasn't there. He just disappeared. So Avalon, when he took it, and as you guys went through, we started seeing maybe a space that had been a bedroom before suddenly became an office, or what was a balcony area got closed in to make something else. I mean, there were little things like that got moved around, and just trying to make like the little study area there with the books and the chair. Avalon added a lot of that stuff.
Add a little personality.
Just to give a little bit of uniqueness to each little nook and cranny. Because it really does. It's kind of blocky and all starts looking the same after a while if you don't do that. So
and then so that was a few weeks that he spent on it, and then I took it over after that, a little bit of time after that, and first thing to do was really put final aesthetics on it. So just applied all of Ed Ink's textures everywhere, broke up a lot of the rooms where that were single blocks or like just single brushes here and there. We added like crown molding and base molding and some beams and things to make it look more interesting. Did a lot of lighting work, made a lot of the spaces more vertical, like a lot of the ceilings with skylights and stuff. Like I put those in there to kind of make those more interesting. And I guess the thing that I'm most proud of in terms of just geometric additions was really adding the rooftop gameplay, because none of that was there before. You couldn't go up on the roofs and you couldn't look out over the ground below. So I kicked the hotel up from 2 stories to 3 stories, put a bunch of gables on the roofs to kind of enhance the Victorian feel a little bit, and put some ledges out there where you could crawl around and jump around. And I think it made it more satisfying to explore the exterior that way. It made it seem a lot less flat.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I think I'm going to go up here on the roof in a minute.
Yeah. And of course, we always like having the roof, roof access.
Yeah. And then, of course, after that was done, after the aesthetics were kind of cleaned up and we did like a lighting pass, then it came time to really put in some of the scripted stuff, like none of the conversations were in. So we scripted all the conversations to be in there, including the really big, long one with Finkel that we'll get to in a little bit. That was a nightmare.
That was a nightmare from every possible
from every possible angle.
It was just...
here's some nice rooftop view that added in. And then after the conversations, of course, we finalized guard patrols. A lot of the guard patrols that were originally in there were really good to get a feel for things, but there weren't really enough patrol points or anything, so they were kind of bumping into walls and not going where they needed to go. So we cleaned those up and just made them a little tighter, put in difficulty level support, all the kind of little technical things that we needed to do in order to make the guard behavior shippable in there. Kind of messed around with some of the locations and keys a little bit, and put in loot.
I was noticing on the roof there, we were overlooking some of the gardens, and again, with some of these missions, we mentioned back in Mission 2 that, we originally had some courtyards and stuff outside of the museum, and then, Mission 10 with the brothel, had some non-crucial, whatever you're going to call it, just fat, space that was around the outside of the the building there that you really didn't have to explore or need to explore to complete the mission, and trying to trim some of that back as much as possible so that you kind of get to the meat of the mission pretty quickly. But of course, keeping in mind that Thief fans have a reputation for wanting to explore and go places even if they're not crucial to the plot. The thing was with the hotel, as Dave mentioned, this being kind of our last big guard-based mission in the city. Twin Dreamer just really kind of went nuts with adding, there's courtyards everywhere, there's multiple entrances, you've got the garden, the gardens out there. There's no reason for a lot of these things, but again, you were trying to sell the idea that this hotel is very expensive, it's very exclusive, it's new. It has all the amenities that any noble could want if they come here to the city on business or for pleasure, just whatever it is. And so this was a place where we kind of, I guess, allowed ourselves to be a little more self-indulgent with our Twin Dreamer was a little more self-indulgent than maybe some of the other designers were allowed to be, just because of the nature of what the mission was and where it fell in the game. He had a lot of freedom to add those things on the outside and some things that weren't just necessary to gameplay.
Yeah, this is a really huge map, but there are certain kinds of Thief players that really enjoy maps like that, like this, and so I thought we were totally justified in making a map like this near the end of the game.
Right.
That was just huge and open and just had tons of these places to explore.
Right. The challenge was trying to figure out a way to make all the spaces somewhat unique and memorable and meaningful. And make sure they had a purpose,
Yeah.
Whether it be, like we just saw there with the fireplace and the fountain, a little lounge type thing, or whatever it was, we really wanted to, keep the map as it was. I mean, nobody really ever talked about cutting it down in size or anything, but it was just we
made
really
a few
got
cuts.
to. Well, I know you guys did, but I mean, it wasn't. We never. It was more of a thing of
practicality. We never really had to discuss it too much. I mean,
this
is another one of those maps, which is of course right at the object limit for Dromad. It's like 7,000 actors or something like that, and so we had to cut a couple spaces down in order to accommodate such a huge space to get the level of detail that we wanted. But we made it work.
With the rest of it, it was just a matter of trying to be creative enough to take what was there and really do something with it, because it was such a great map and a great layout that Twin Dreamer had originally, and it would have been a shame really to lose a lot of it.
Yeah, we didn't really have to at this point. I mean, this is late in the game. It's fine to have a big open-ended map like this.
Yeah. Lots of loot in this one. I think I've seen more questions about loot, and I'm coming up. I'm in the middle of doing, as I mentioned before, doing some walkthroughs or editing some walkthroughs that have already been done actually, and trying to do loot maps. And I'm really not looking forward to this mission because the loot. There's so much loot, and it's really spread out, and a lot of people have had trouble finding all the getting 100% in this one.
Yeah, it's funny. Thief players are the most obsessive compulsive players ever. Find everything in every map. I was guilty of that for a while myself.
Yeah. I don't know if guilty is a good word.
Guilty, yeah.
You were indulgent like that.
I was indulgent. Back when I had free time.
When you have time to look under every table. And the gambling hall. Yeah, gambling hall. We that was something that early on we discussed, that we wanted the gambling hall. And of course, this conversation coming up here.
Guess we should...
Is what?
Oh, I just want to point out real quick those objects, like those gambling tables and stuff. They were great. We had a lot of little objects like that. I think they were made by Mud Shovel, like a lot of our objects were. He and Von Hines really cranked out a ton of them, and they're really highly detailed, really nice additions.
Yeah. They again, something kind of unique that we had. This conversation that's coming up here, the voice acting is, it was all right. It wasn't. It didn't really quite have the tone that we originally envisioned when we wrote it, but the idea was to get across, to give the player and Zaya some idea that something is not right with the manager of this place. That Finkel, who's the hotel manager, could possibly have a gambling problem. That there might possibly be a way to blackmail him in some way, and so thus giving Zaya a little bit of leverage and. So this conversation where the girl's talking about him staying late and kind of the implication that he's not being completely ethical with the money that's coming into the hotel was real important to establish who he was and how she could kind of use him and manipulate or, blackmail him to find Kadar and get Kadar back. Mm-hmm. If it had only been that easy. I think coming up here, when we go to Finkel's office and have this conversation with him, there probably was not a single story issue that gave us more headache than this issue of having to get to the hotel manager and show him a note, that you had the goods on him, that he'd been gambling and gambled away a lot of the money. And his response to that, and what happens if the player knocks him out. And, it was just, I think almost up until the very end, we were revamping that and, redoing text documents and trying to figure out a way to make that work. It was just really complicated. And again, it's just one of those things where, if one person was sitting down writing the script to this or writing a book about this, you might do it completely differently. But this was an idea that came about fairly early in the design or in the plot meetings. And we wanted to be true to that and keep it, and it looked really good on paper, that she's going to find out this guy's a gambling problem, manipulate him, threaten him, but then you get into the game and boy, have we ever seen Garrett threaten somebody, blackmail somebody in game? I mean, it hadn't been done, and so the logistics of trying to figure that out were very, very complicated from a design standpoint, and from a plot technical standpoint,
and plot, from technical.
It was just it was one of the things that I wished, in retrospect, I may have should have made some kind of executive decision at that point to just say, we got to find a different way to do this, or we need to change how this is going to play out, because it's too complicated. It's too easy to break. It's too easy for the player to not do it in the order that it needs to be done, and get the desired result.
I think it's okay though, because even players that didn't find the blackmail notes, they still were able to complete the mission. There was never anything that was unbreakable in this map. It's just the players.
But those
that
were things
found
we
the
added
blackmail
in
notes.
later. We said, hey, to me, the beta testers are not getting what's supposed to happen here. We got to find another way for them to still get to the basement to find Kadar.
Yeah, we actually, I blame that partially on the fact that I was a real optimist at the start, because we were scripting things that are well outside the scope of anything that was done in the original missions. To give you an idea, like the conversation that we're talking about right now, we're going to come up on it in I guess about 5 or 10 minutes here. And
I jumped the gun talking about it.
and in any given conversation, quote unquote, in the Thief games has at most 10 actions, and an action can be like an animation or a scripted line of dialogue or whatever. And we needed 5 of those conversation actors. There was like 50 steps or whatever to get it all done and to account for all possibilities in here. So, and we totally had to rig it up so like one conversation would trigger the next, and it was just it was a nightmare to get all that working. I mean, it was feasible as possible, and we scripted it in a way that I believe is unbreakable. But just
eventually,
eventually. But planning ahead and getting all that done and in game required a lot of creativity and a lot of patience. I think. Yeah,
that was the one point where I almost said, screw the idea of this being a community project and a democratic. I'm going to change this because it really was just it was a real pain for a while. Something I was going to mention, we were in the restaurant a moment ago there, and that was another kind of fun thing that the plot team got to do was both on the train there were some menus in the dining car, and then if they're in the restaurant, some menus, and that was just a fun little thing to do, is to jump on the web and go around and try to find all these fancy French restaurants and places, and just what are some really expensive and bizarre things that people eat,
and snobby food that you can throw in there.
And just try to put together a menu that that looked like a real menu. And Valletta actually used, I should have mentioned in Mission 1, but she actually used a real the pumpkin bread recipe that you find in the kitchen of Mission 1. It's a chocolate droplet pumpkin bread. She said that was a real recipe, and it's one of her favorites. And then there's a cheese scone recipe in there that's real.
There's a lot of little funny stuff like that.
Yeah, so we should
things
like that come up.
Real quick, we should talk about the security system here.
Yes,
the security system is one of the main obstacles that I think you have in this map. Because really, we wanted the player to get Finkel's office key in the main hallway, or in the main entrance room, I should say, that's locked in this little lockbox, and you can't do it because you have a guy who's behind the desk, and you have all these security cameras, and there's other guards that are close by, and it's just really impossible to get to right off the bat. And so we leave these notes scattered around the map that tells you that the security code has been changed, and they tell you what the security code is. So you go to security office, and then you shut down the security system in the lobby, so it's like now suddenly it becomes a lot easier. And then what we also did was we also scripted the guy in the lobby to go to the security room and turn it back on, which would give you a window of time to go completely undeterred into the main room, unfettered, and try to grab that key that you need. And it actually ends up being pretty challenging. So
well, it's a nice little twist because we're used to having to go turn security systems off. We've done that in several missions, not in the original game, but in Thief 2, but also here. So it's kind of a surprise when all of a sudden the guy goes and turns it back on. You're just, oh crap.
So the easiest thing to do is just to blackjack him when he's on his way in, which is what I did here. Yeah. And then I was pissed, so I hit him with a locust bomb and ate his corpse. Yeah. But
if you're ghosting, that's a real tough. I keep bringing that up just because there's people that have asked asked about ghosting some of these, and it's possible. It's just you've got to really time it.
What you really have to do there is pick the lock on the little lockbox part of the way, and then go back and set the security system again, and then go back and pick it again. If you absolutely don't want to get caught.
Right. Yeah, it's a long process.
Yeah, but again, I mean, there's nothing stopping the player from using their player tools. You could go in there once the security system is shut down, and shoot the things with fire arrows or EMP grenades or do whatever you want to make sure that you're not caught. That really doesn't matter.
Exactly.
So here, I think I actually am making my way to Finkel's office.
Okay.
I have the key. Yeah, the
character that I created, but I hate the guy, man. Yeah, he's such a pain.
The front room there, the front lobby also had keys to some of the other rooms. There were some suite keys and so forth in there, and those keys, like all the other keys in the game, disappear if you've opened all those rooms. Again, to avoid inventory clutter.
Yeah. So, this was a nice idea that I'm glad survived. And I don't know if this was in Twin Dreamers original.
Yeah, this was in there.
Thing was it we talked about that. any hotel is going to have a security, valuables lockup.
Yeah, vault.
And man, if you're a thief, that's one of the places you've got to get into. Now this used to be different as well. Remember?
Yeah, vaguely.
Here? You climb up in the.
Yeah, I'm not the one who added this little secret. I think maybe that was Avalon or maybe it was Twin Dreamer. I don't remember.
But see, instead of just getting the mine, it used to actually didn't it go up into the room of which I don't, have you been into that room yet where we find
I think it was the destroyed room with all the furniture overturned and stuff.
It actually used to lead up into the room where the guy was, had rented the room right above the vault there, and of course we find him dead in there because he had messed with the, I guess he had something with the rust gas or whatever it was. I can't even remember what it was. I don't even remember now. But he had messed, I think it was rust gas from a mask or something, and basically died in the room. It was stinking the place up, but he was trying to tunnel, dig down into that
into the vault,
valuables storage, and for some reason, I think we kept getting stuck in there or something like that. So we had to change that. Well, here's Finkel, the manager.
Yeah. So we made this space very unstealth friendly. It's very well lit. So if you go in here without the notes, you're going to see that you have no place to hide. So maybe players will turn around and go back in the other direction until they figure out they're supposed to go back here when they find the notes. And players that do find the notes will walk a few feet in, then he'll start reacting and you'll get the message on screen. So even though this is a stealth game and players are really used to avoiding AI, we tried to make it clear enough so that you come in here and get immediate feedback that it's okay, that he's going to see you right away.
But it was just so awkward because you've been looting this guy's hotel, now you just walk up in broad day, and that was just the way it was written.
It's kind of strange, maybe we could have done it a different way.
Well, and that was the thing to me that bothered me the most about this is that it just didn't feel thiefy, and I can't explain why. I mean, because Garrett, like we've talked about, he he does have an in-game conversation with Cuddy, who's his friend, in Crag's Cleft. But then he confronts, he talks to the pagan in Precious Cargo that's in the freezer. But those guys are fairly friendly to Garrett, and you feel pretty safe knowing they're not going to attack you.
Yeah.
This guy, you've been looting his hotel, now you just walk right up to him, and it just seemed counterintuitive to what we're used to doing in the Thief games. But once it had been written that way, and the whole hotel was designed to accommodate that storyline and thing playing out, where you got to get the basement key from him and get down to get. There just wasn't really a way to work around it, so we had to go on through with this. But and it worked in the end. But it's just one of those areas where I felt like we probably could have found a way to do it a little more thiefy.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, I mean, technically here we just had to account for a lot of different actions that the player might do. That's a little alarm switch right there. So if you go in there and you take the key too early, he'll freak out and ring the alarm. If you raise your weapon against him, he'll ring the alarm. If you watch him play through the entire sequence, he'll hand you the key and he'll faint over on the side there. Right. So.
And even that, I think when he fainted, sometimes I remember some of the beta testers weren't real clear that's what had actually happened. I didn't do anything to him. Why did he die? He didn't die. He fainted. Well, we're not used to seeing that, really. I mean, when is a character fainted in any of the original missions? So it was just kind of you guys did a great job coming up with handling all those scenarios. But to me, it just seemed like it was such a clunky part of the. It was one of those things where plot and design didn't really mesh as well as they could have, and it was mainly the plot team's fault because we just didn't, we didn't think about how that was actually going to play out in the game. Yeah. But I'll quit griping about it because it worked, and
it is a memorable moment from the map. I think a lot of people do remember it.
Well, and by the time you get, you've not really had, like I said, this is a huge map, and there's not as many scripted conversations and stuff as we've had in some of the smaller ones. So by the time you get there, you really are ready for some type of progress, forward in the plot.
Some kind of confrontation.
Something to let you know you're on the right track and everything. So,
so you say I never ghost anything. Look at that. Look at that perfect.
Look at that.
Look at that good. Perfect pickpocketing.
That was
there.
pretty good. See, I'm one of those guys. I mean, that's for some reason, ever since I ghosted Dart Project the first time, I just tend to play that way now without even thinking about it, and it really, like I say, for somebody like that, you have a tendency to not use a lot of the new weapons, which is a shame because they're a lot of fun. But I tend to really hoard my resources and that kind of thing. So, but it works that way too. I mean, you can play it however you want.
Yeah, one of the things that I think makes this map so challenging is that the lighting is very bright everywhere. You're kind of forced to rely on very hard-line shadows that you might find in a corner, or actually to duck around out of the line of sight of some AIs in order to avoid them.
Yeah, and there's marble floor in a lot of those places where you might duck around, so you got to be careful with that too.
And because of that, I think that's another reason why this map really reminded me of Thief 2. The lighting actually in the Thief games was not as consistent, I think, as a lot of people remember, because there's actually this problem with the default properties on lights in Thief, where they're set to have an infinite radius, like a radius of 0, you call it. And what happens when that property is left at the default, at that 0 radius, is that as long as that light is can raycast to the player anywhere, it influences the light gem, the visibility gem, which is how visible you are. And so even though the shading on the light might look like it's not quite reaching to a particular dark corner, that it's still affecting your visibility adversely, and that's something the designers, I have to say, weren't quite as careful about in Thief and Thief 2 as maybe they could have been. So it's something that we were really kind of retentive about in T2X. We wanted to put really tight radiuses on all of our lights and make sure that shadows were really clearly defined. But in this map, we kind of let ourselves go a little bit because we wanted it to be pretty challenging. We wanted the lights to reach pretty far. So I think instead of giving them infinite radiuses, we just gave them really large radiuses or radii. And I had them overlap a lot to make the stealth space very difficult.
See, rooms like this are what we originally definitely envisioned for the hotel, where you've got the fireplace and the little fountain in the room. I mean, it's just, really, the full table laid out with the gold, silver, place setting and all that. Even though all the rooms weren't like that, we had enough of them that, you get the message that this isn't just a cheesy little hotel. There's some really wealthy people staying here. And, of course, when we first looked at the space, it was all empty and so, but you could kind of picture that going on, and you guys really, really did a good job of filling all that up.
Yeah, we just flushed it out. The ideas were already there. So
here's the library.
Yes.
Is any good hotel for whatever reason has a library.
Yes. And it's a library with its own security guard.
Yeah. This was not, this reminded me a little bit of just, we've seen a library in Gervasius's mansion. He's wealthy enough to afford a library, and then of course the museum had the big library section in it, and so it's, for whatever reason, the library is kind of, if you look at especially Thief 2, having a big library is associated with wealthy, with the wealthy people in the bigger mansions. Bafford had his own little library that Garrett comments on. He says, I wonder if he reads them or they're just for show. So there's kind of that established piece of mythology in the thief world that if somebody owns a lot of books, if they own a lot of enough space to have a library and own all these books, the books apparently are not cheap, and it's something that wealthy people would have. And so if you've got a hotel like this that's accommodating that type of clientele, it's going to have a library as well. And that goes back to the medieval thing, in the Dark Ages and medieval days, not many people could read, and there wasn't a lot of literature. It was pretty much confined to the church and
the church
wealthy
had
people.
all the books and all the power.
Right, until was it Cosimo Medici came along and built the library in Florence. But it was just something that it's a nice way to fill up space too, and the library does. The book textures look real nice and kind of posh. So here we're in the basement finally.
Yeah,
looking for Kadar.
The basement was always the most sparse of all the spaces in this map.
Big, huge open areas.
Yeah, big, huge open areas, and really, I think it was just by virtue of the fact that it needed to span like pretty much the entire length of the hotel underneath of it, because there were two entrances like on opposite sides of the hotel, so we had to fill the space in between. Although it does look better, I think, with new custom textures down there and so forth. Yeah. And here we had some of the servant rooms that are just kind of in the dirt, like completely sparse and undecorated, like simple living quarters for them.
Yeah. And of course, this is again Zaya's kind of getting an idea of what the servants are being used for and how they're treated and all, which we already know, but she hasn't really fully understood that yet, and this is just helping her get a picture of the type of place he's been living in. And here you're in this rich hotel with all this food and everything, and he's sleeping on a straw cot, in a dirt floor room kind of a thing, which of course makes her even more angry and sad about the whole situation. Yeah, and that basement is a real bugger to Ghost too, because of the robots. That's pretty tough to reminded me a lot of Soul Forge in places with the robots trying to get through there.
We really only had Mechanist robots, I guess, in I want to say in two missions in this game. In the train mission, shadowing the enemy, and then in this one, they were not the most popular enemies from Thief 2, but they did serve an important gameplay function. So we brought them back kind of sparingly to use in these instances.
And we need to show also, I think, again in this, just to remind of the time frame, that the Mechanists are actually selling these security systems, and they're becoming more prominent, especially in the more upscale establishments.
Yeah, they're fictionally important for sure.
Yeah, because we're into now. This is probably about the time that maybe Garrett would have been going to the Mechanist Seminary, and Truett and Karras were conspiring together and all that. So the Mechanists are definitely becoming a prominent force in the city, a force to be reckoned with. Mm-hmm. A lot of ways to die in this basement. You can get trapped by 3 or 4 of these guys at the same time, and you're just really in trouble.
Yeah, but again, you got a lot of player tools like here, just to take them out. in my own version of ghosting style there with the fire arrow to the face.
Yeah, that's.
Just because I think it really is fun.
I think that's called Halo style.
Yeah.
Is what that's actually referred to.
Yeah, because it really is fun to use the tools. I mean,
oh, yeah.
I ghost some of the time for these playthroughs. I certainly didn't. But you have a lot of tools at this point, so a lot of means to deal with your problems. Here's another small, very contrived way to use an ice arrow here.
Yeah, some of these little details weren't here in Twin Dreamer's build, but definitely the space. I mean, you could tell that was the thing. You're trying to interpret what was he going to do with this, and hopefully we got pretty close in it.
Yeah, and even if not, I mean, the space is a lot better than it was. Yeah. So.
Yeah. But
the layout is all sound. We're approaching the kitchen here where Kadar is being kept.
Yeah.
We intentionally made him the only Mechana servant in the basement,
right.
so in your objectives and through the conversations that he's in the basement. So you can't miss him. Originally, we had a line of dialogue where he talked to Zaya, but it sounded kind of cheesy and not right. So we just took it out and.
Have to deal damage there. That was kind of
you
tough
can
to figure out how to get around that. But
yeah,
she had to carry him out.
You can hit him with a gas arrow, and that doesn't count as damage.
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, you do actually have to knock him out. We felt that was okay.
Yeah. Put him out of his misery for a little bit there.
Yeah.
And of course, the sad thing, for us who know the story, is that she thinks she's going to be able to take this mask off and save him at this point, and we know that that's just not going to happen. And obviously, Malik has
other plans.
But still, that's you're still trying to show she's very hopeful that all this effort that she has put into finding him and everything that she had to go through with the smugglers, that it's going to pay off somehow. And the sad thing is that it never really does, other than she doesn't realize that she removes the threat of Malik from Garrett's path, and so that's kind of a payoff for us as the player. But she's kind of the tragic hero of the story in that it's not really a happy ending for her.
Yeah.
But again, that was necessary to tie it into Thief 2.
And here we go, a triple combustion arrow threat. Yeah, we made those little. We redid those little powder kegs. Powder kegs were in Thief and Thief 2, but you couldn't pick them up and throw them. And we just thought it was yet again another opportunity for emerging gameplay, just to be able to pick them up and set them down.
Right. And to me, like anything that kills spiders is good.
Yeah. And so the object or the objective we had behind this little basement area was really to provide a quick way out of the hotel, because the entrances to the basement down here were really in the middle of the hotel, and if you carried Kadar back up that way, then you really had a lot of space to traverse, and you were carrying him a really long distance. This way we could
It's kind of redundant too.
Yeah, it's kind of redundant too, yeah, so we could kind of shorten the distance and kind of give you a new space to explore by putting this little secret area down here.
There's a bug here we kept fighting where you would take him out and lay him on the ground, and the game wouldn't end, and you try to take him out the front door and see if it would end in that way, and sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. And
actually that was really the same bug that prevented us from using that same scripting method for the doors in the train map. We talked about those proximity triggers, the bounce triggers, not being 100% reliable, and we actually had one of our code guys, Galesaver, I think, had a script that would detect an object inside a specific object inside a bounce trigger. So we had to detect Kadar, and it didn't work all the time. And I think it wasn't his fault. It was the fact that the LGS code wasn't reliable for those proximity triggers all the time. We ended up having to use again sources and receptrons, which is just the other signal based system, and that they were 100% reliable all the time. So that's what solved it. And
there's the gate that we saw in Mission 3. It's just to connect it in. You saw the service entrance.
Same geometry from While the City Sleeps.